Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. There is a reason why you should not burn witches. Let me preface by saying I have always been very honest about what I was. I've never had any shame with what I am, with what my mother was, my grandmother, and a long line of women stretching back to the seeming beginning of time. I am a witch. I have always practiced. I have always had power, and not once have I ever harmed another living being. Not ever, despite what anyone might say. Several years ago, I saw a shirt a young lady was wearing on a rare trip to town. It said, "I am the descendant of the witches you forgot to burn." That shirt made me laugh. I ended up buying one off the internet at the public library. I don't have the internet at home, you see. I have been a self-imposed hermit for decades now. It's the best. I made a choice and I have to stick with it. Back in the 70s, when I was still relatively young, something dark came to our town. Even I couldn't ascertain where it had come from. Not even my mother or my grandmother or any member of our small coven could understand its origin. Regardless of where it had come from, it had come here. We first became aware of this dark thing when the first child went missing. The little boy turned up later, dead and drained and emaciated like a dried cicada husk. We were blamed first, because of course we were. If there was anything from rain to snow to someone with a bad case of acne, everyone in our town pointed a finger at us. Some did it in jest, some in habit, and some in outright and malicious hatred. Edith had been the first ones to sense the thing. I still remember that evening. We had met for tea, no witchy business at all. It had been a delightful afternoon tea, when the poor lady had clutched her pearls and gasped like she'd seen a mouse. "Are you all right, Edith? Tea too hot?" My mother had asked softly, but I knew she suspected that was not the case. Not with the way her eyes narrowed as she looked at the middle-aged woman. No. Dear heavens, something has come to our town. I felt it pass through like a cold wind down my spine. Something wicked. Tears were in her eyes as she spoke. My mother nodded and poured out her tea, reading her tea leaves while the rest of us looked on in anticipation. Her face was grim as she read what the bits of waterlogged tea leaves had to say. "My dear ladies, we have work to do." My mother sat standing, wiping her hands on her apron as she stood. And we got to work, day and night. Each of us using our particular talents to not only track the thing, but find a way to contain it. Constance read her ancient tomes and texts. Mary tracked the beast to its lair, using her divination skills. My mother and grandmother had their spells and potions, and I helped. My skills were in dreams and their interpretation. I spent many days fast asleep in medicine-induced stupor to glean what I could about this interloper. All I could learn was that it was ancient. Perhaps at one point it was worshipped. It had been summoned by those with less skill to do their bidding. Instead, it had killed its would-be jailers and fled into the world, finding victims and blood where it could. Do you have a name, Gretchen? Without a name, to bind at our prison will not be as effective. My mother asked me, her voice filled with concern and anger, though thankfully that anger was not directed at me. No mother, no name. It has many names, and the dreams have not revealed its true name to me. I said softly, "No matter. The magic and bindings will hold, though we ourselves will be bound to it until our deaths," my grandmother explained. Her voice was old and strained after so many weeks of working magic. She seemed as frail as paper and as thin. "And what about after our death, Elizabeth?" "What then?" Mary asked, her voice sharp and worn thin of patience. "Then it shall be free. Unless we can learn its true name and banish it from whence it came," my grandmother said with a tiny shrug. "A price we must pay to contain it. It's been killing children. It will not stop until it's gone through every innocent life in the town." Edith said teary-eyed, "We lay our trap. It was easy. I was a willing bait for the thing. I was the youngest, and mother and grandmother had filled me with potions and tinctures to make me more appetizing to the thing. We lured it to a small cave located on our property. We needed somewhere private where prying eyes would not see us, and more importantly, not disturb the thing once it was captured. It came quickly on its shadowed feet. It took no effort to hide itself. It was darkness itself. No prey escaped it once it had its eyes set upon it. By this time, over a dozen children and young women had been killed. More blame was laid at our feet. We were being threatened to our faces. Dead animals were being thrown into our yards. Bricks with threats written on them were tossed at windows. When I felt the thing's presence at my back, it took all the strength I had to not run. Our magic was strong, and unbeknownst to the thing, it was already trapped. I could feel the panic set in when realized it could not leave the cave. Whispered threats were uttered as it reached for me and found it could not grasp me. It writhed, it screamed and begged, and it promised all manner of worldly goods and powers if it would let us go. We ignored it. We all took turns sealing the small cave with bricks and mortar. No easy task to do in the forest on unsteady ground, but we managed. When the final brick was laid, our powers were tied to its containment, to its life, and hopefully eventually death. As long as one of us lived, it would be locked behind its prison of earth and brick. But then we started to die, one by one as old age claimed us. My grandmother first, followed by my mother. Constance drowned on a trip to Florida Edith, and Mary lived to be in their 90s. But the Grim Reaper comes for everyone in the end. I am the last. I am in my 80s. I have never married or had children, though it was not for lack of trying. The rumors that it had been me and my coven who had killed those innocents all those years ago never went away. They only grew, and no man wanted me. I have been friendless now for many years now. I have tried to find out the true name of the thing, but to no avail. I have looked in books. I have scoured the internet and found nothing. I have reached out to other supposed witches and been met with scammers and liars. I feel so alone, and now I am dying. The last few years of harassment has gotten so much worse. I have not been able to safely leave my home, as when I do I am followed and stalked. I've been threatened with death, and today it seems like they have made good on their threats. My home is on fire. The flames are creeping along my hallway, and I can see the light from the fire getting brighter. And there is smoke, so much smoke. Outside my window I hear them screaming. Screaming the same thing people like them have screamed for centuries. Burn the witch! Burn the witch! I have fallen to the floor, and I'm coughing. And I am afraid. Afraid for myself and the others. There are many innocent people that live in this town now. I can feel the thing stirring now. I can feel its anticipation. Once I die, it will be free. And the bricks have already begun to fall away. As the flames finally reach my door, I feel pity. I have no illusions about the pain and fear this creature will unleash on the people of this town. And they are about to learn a very important lesson, one that will be written in the blood of their children. There's a reason why you shouldn't burn witches. Story 2. 3 months after my wife's funeral. She started calling every night at 2:13 a.m. The calls started 3 months after the funeral. Same time every night. Same voice. Lock the door twice, she whispers. And don't answer if it isn't me. Click. I do what she says. I always did. Even when she was alive and already leaving me. She loved someone else at the end. A woman. The kind who holds your hand and robs you blind with her other one. They thought I didn't know. They thought I didn't see the second toothbrush, the softened lies, the long showers after Pilates. They thought I didn't read the messages. They thought I wouldn't taste the wine. I did. I swallowed. I smiled. I asked for another glass. I've always been good at playing dead. They did it the gentle way. Candles, music, poison with a fruit note. She sat close and told me I'd go in my sleep, and her girl stood behind her with the kind of smile you use to put a dog to rest. I closed my eyes at the right time. Let my pulse go soft. Let my breath go thin. Let guilt do half their work for them. They drove me in the dark. They cried the right tears. They laid me by water and held hands and told each other they were brave. And when they left, I got up. I walked home with wet shoes and a throat full of metal and the moon hanging there like an open eye. I unlocked my own door twice and sat in my own chair until morning. When she came in and saw me, she pressed a hand to her chest like a cliche. She made a small sound. She folded the floor. The doctors called a heart attack. Her girl didn't scream. She kissed me on the mouth and tasted like rosemary and crime. "Told you come back," she said. Because here's the part my wife never learned. Her girl was mine first. We planned it quietly, months before the poison. She slid into my messages, and I let her. She rehearsed the lines with me and then sold them to my wife. She chose the wine, the dosage, the song. I chose the night. It was a simple plan. Let them kill me, come back wrong. Let guilt finish what the bottle started. She'd always had a bad heart. The surgeon said so when she was 22. She kept her pills in a white ceramic bowl that said "blessed" on it. She was careful with everything except me. Locked the door twice. The dead woman begs me now every night. I do. Out of habit. Out of love. Out of something meaner than both. People ask what grief feels like. It feels like power when you stop pretending you need forgiveness. I kept the house. I kept the car. I kept the rosemary my wife's lover planted on my windowsill the week after the funeral. Because I like the way it smells when I cut it. Sometimes at 2:13 a.m., the phone rattles on a nightstand and I answer. "You were supposed to love me," she says. "Why are you still with her?" I tell her the truth. Because you taught me exactness. Because you taught me to check the locks. Because you made me practice being alone. And then you left me with someone who hates to be. Click. In the morning I make eggs in her old pan. The girl pads out of my bedroom. Our bedroom. Wraps herself in my wife's robe. And laughs when I set 2 plates down like some suburban priest. Then she still calls. She says, "Every night." I say. The girl kisses my cheek and steals my fork. Because stealing is how she says I love you. We don't talk about the water. We don't talk about the wine. We don't talk about how easy it is to teach someone how to kill you if you promise them it's mercy. We do talk about locks. 2 turns. Always 2. Before you judge me, understand this. I didn't make my wife plan my death. I just stopped getting in the way when she wanted to be free. I let her believe the poison would do it clean. I let her believe guilt wouldn't. And when she fell, I didn't catch her. I answer the phone instead. "Don't answer if it isn't me," she pleads. "Please." I always answer you. I tell the dead. I just don't do what you say. Last week, the girl asked if I ever feel haunted. I said, "Only when I forget the rules." "What rules?" "Lock the door twice. Don't drink from anyone you don't plan to bury. Don't give away what you can take. And if a phone rings after midnight, don't answer if it isn't me," she finished grinning. She knows how to speak my language. She's fluent in we. If you want a happy ending, there isn't one. There's just a kitchen at night, and a phone that rings at 2:13, and a man who picks it up because he likes to hear a ghost learn the shape of his silence. There are 2 plates in the sink and 2 locks on the door, and 2 people who sleep fine, because we earn it the ugly way. Sometimes the dead ask for apologies. Sometimes she asks me to leave the girl. Sometimes she asks what I did with the bottle, the car, the second toothbrush, the blessed bowl. "Where is she?" she sobbed once. "Where did you put her?" "She's right here," I say, and watch my lover walk past my chair in my wife's robe to lock the door twice. The line goes quiet. Then the slow breath of someone who can't help loving me wrong. "Watch out," she whispers finally. I smile into the dark. We wrote the rules. Story 3. There's something wrong with Aunt Marie. I just got home after spending a week at my cousin's house, and I'm convinced that something is seriously wrong with my aunt. I told my parents about everything, hoping they'd understand how disturbing the whole experience was. They assured me they'd talk to her and figure out what was going on, but now she won't return their calls. It feels like they're not doing anything, and the truth is, the whole thing has left me deeply shaken. It all started when my mom told me I'd be staying with my cousin while she and my dad went on their anniversary trip. something I wasn't exactly thrilled about. For one, they never took me on any of their trips. And for another, I didn't particularly like my cousin. His name was Austin, and he was a very whiny child. One year at my birthday party, he cried because I got the toy he'd always wanted. And everyone surprised my aunt and uncle left the party and came back an hour later with the same exact toy I'd gotten before him. Luckily, we were the same age, which barely helped, since our interests couldn't have been further apart. Something I was instantly reminded the moment I arrived at his house. My uncle greeted us at the door with my cousin, Austin, standing beside him. "Welcome in," he said cheerfully. "Okay, buddy, we'll see you in a week. Have fun," my mom called out as she gave me a quick hug. My dad chimed in with a forced grin. He's been so excited about this. "Yeah, right." Austin led me to the guest room where I'd be staying, where I dropped my stuff off. Then he took me to his room. "Well, these are my wrestling toys," he said, motioning proudly to a pile of bulky, plastic muscleman action figures. "I'm good," I said flatly, making it clear I'd outgrown that kind of stuff. Trying to change the subject, I asked, "Can we go explore the woods in your backyard?" I remembered how cool their property was. Dense trees, winding trails, and a large creek running through all of it. Austin's face changed. "No, Mom will be home soon," he said with a slight frown. "And," I asked, raising an eyebrow, "why does that matter?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the pile of toys, paused, then sat cross-legged on the floor. "She just won't like that," he muttered. For about an hour, we just sat there catching up, and I could tell Austin wanted to tell me something. Soon, my aunt came through the door, loudly welcoming me into their home. The sight of her scared me. She had a lot of makeup on, much lighter than her natural skin tone, and she wore blue and green eyeshadow with bright red lipstick, which wasn't exactly perfect. "Did you guys play with the fighter, man?" she said as she rushed to the ground beside Austin, grabbing one of the toys and stringing him up by his arms. She bounced him up and down, moving toward me. Her face then froze in a goofy grin as she held an uncomfortable pose. I froze, and just as I was about to say something, she did instead. "Dinner?" she barked as she tossed the toy aside and ran out of the room in a scurry, my uncle hanging his head low as he followed. Dinner was god-awful. It was some sort of mix between blood, soup, and skin gumbo, which I had no problem expressing my disinterest in. My aunt ate as if she would never get another meal again, wearing the blood-colored soup all over her face, mixing with her caked-on makeup. She then let out a laugh I hadn't heard in a while. My Aunt Marie always had a funny and unique laugh. That much I remembered. I asked to be excused, as my stomach had begun to hurt. After offering me something else for dinner, my uncle excused me so I could go lie down. Shortly after going to the guest room, I was already feeling better, but the room was very stuffy, which led me to ask for a fan. Austin brought me his fan for his room and apologized to me. "I'm really sorry, man," he said with a frown. "For what?" I asked, as I plugged the fan in and received immediate relief. "For whatever happens," Austin replied as he left the guest room. I was perplexed by this statement, but chalked it up to his mom's behavior and prepared to fall asleep. As I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sound of my cousin's wind tunnel fan, I was suddenly jolted awake by something. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. Then I felt a slight pressure on the bed, and I noticed that my eyes couldn't adjust to the darkness. In front of me stretched a pitch-black void, and that's when I realized what had woken me. Someone was lying in bed with me, their breathing perfectly synchronized with mine. Panic set in. I tried to move away, but as I did, hands grabbed mine. The more I struggled, the tighter their grip became, until I managed to kick the intruding figure off of the bed. I scrambled to my feet and rushed to turn on the lights, but they wouldn't work. With my back to the door, I crept toward it, desperate to escape. As soon as I turned the knob, rapid footsteps slapped across the room toward me. I flinched and fell to the side just as a black mass shot past, slamming the door behind it. Then I heard it laughing, its voice growing fainter as it moved down the hall. And that's when a chilling thought struck me. Was that Aunt Marie's laugh? Story 4. Descent into Heaven I know all of you mean well, but I'm getting really tired of being asked about my ascension. I tried to make it clear to you it was a painful subject, but that just seemed to goad you into persisting. I understand that spiritual transcendence sounds like a dream come true, that beholding the face of ultimate reality would give you some sort of inner peace, but it wasn't like that at all. So, although this disturbs me more than you can imagine, I'm finally giving in. I've written this to explain, once and for all, what happened, but after this, no more questions about it. Ever okay? I'm dead serious. It happened while I was associated with the Free Dias Foundation. Don't take that as an endorsement. Please don't flood into their temples or hound their monks, demanding to learn the secrets of the universe. I was merely a loosely affiliated customer when it happened, and I have no idea how much credit they can take. I'm a seeker, and I belong to many organizations in my life. I've even pursued my own path, based on what I felt in my heart. Was that the true source of my experience? Even I don't know, but I remember how it started. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and as I had many times before, I found myself in the temple, one of many supplicants in the central hall, sitting upon scented pillows, meditating together. The monks kept censers of incense burning around the altar, acolytes fanning the smoke with palm fronds, sending it wafting over our heads. Some supplicants hummed, some chanted, but many, like me, preferred to sit in silence. I don't even know what triggered it. I was just sitting there, reaching out to the universe in my mind, trying to contain any desire for particular results. I knew that letting my ego determine my path was a sure road to nowhere, and strove to keep it in check. Deep down inside, though, I could never help feeling that I demonstrated my superiority and worthiness by choosing to pursue this path, as opposed to the degraded, mundane reality of everyday life. The endless pursuit of pleasure, the mind-numbing pop culture, the lowbrow distractions. I felt they were beneath me. My meditation wasn't just a practice. It was a defiant act, a righteous path to defy the squalor of existence. I admit I may have cultivated a quiet ego about my spiritual worthiness. I'm not saying this to elevate myself or to judge anyone. I'm just putting it out there so that you understand where I was really coming from. As far as I know, I was doing what I always did. There was nothing special about that day. But the first change I noticed was that the ambient noise became quieter, its volume gently and smoothly ramping down, as if it or I were somehow far away. I tried my best not to react to it. It seemed to be a good sign that I was finally tuning out the outside world, a positive development in my practice of meditation. Then, without any warning, I felt a shift. Not a gentle awakening, but a jarring, almost violent displacement. The temple, the sounds, the very air dissipated. It wasn't at all what I expected ascension to feel like. I suddenly found myself somewhere else. To my great dismay, it wasn't a brightly lit cloud bank or a liminal space where God gazed upon us beatifically. It was a crowded plaza, the sky a sickly shade of greenish-brown. I found myself beset from all sides by a vast, bustling, indifferent crowd. The air here was ethereal. It was stale, a little stuffy, smelling faintly of ozone and old dust. Before me, in the distance, shimmering brilliantly, stood a golden gate. It was exactly as heaven's entrance had been described in countless paintings and innumerable near-death experiences. The crowd slowly shuffled forward, drawn inexorably toward it. There didn't seem to be much choice but to go along with them, so I let the multitude gently sweep me forward. I had plenty of time to look around me. The crowd was a bewildering mix. As expected, there were hunched old people who appeared to have ambled out of their deathbeds, their heads turned to and fro to survey the crowd, many wearing the same blank, uneasy expression. Some were unnaturally thin, little more than walking skeletons. They tended to flop their poorly supported upper body onto whomever was nearby. This earned them indignant glares, but little else. It seemed clear they couldn't help it. Others were morbidly obese, standing on their own for the first time in years. No need for the expected aluminum-framed walker with the shoe-like tennis balls impaled on its front legs. The crushing density of the crowd let them move forward on their own, at the slow pace they were accustomed to. Many were weary middle-aged folks marked by chronic illness. More than anyone else there, they seemed at peace, content to shuffle along with the others. A few of them blinked in the unaccustomed light, Although their eyes showed the blank scare of diabetes-induced blindness, they could apparently see again, but appeared too surprised to enjoy it. One fellow I will never forget. All that was left of his face was a single eyeball. At least half of his head was missing, the void reaching nearly the back of his skull. His throat sewn up save for 2 small holes, possibly for breathing and eating. I'd heard of severe head cancer cases like this, but had never seen one. He appeared none the worse for wear, though, his animated movements telegraphing his joy and relief. Some were agitated young people, clearly having arrived via sudden, violent ends from accidents or risky exploits. They gave themselves away with their horrified expressions and futile pleas for another chance. Finally, they would sink into sullen silence and join the others, only moving when someone pushed them from behind. A few held their severed limbs with their remaining good arm, unsure what else to do with them. Others struggled to remove wooden beams or steel spikes from their torsos, some garnering help from those nearby, only to be forced to carry their instruments of impalement, there being nowhere else to put them. One held onto her head with both hands, the blood on her shoulders giving away her injury. Occasionally, she would hold her head high to get a better look around, but would quickly lower it back onto the bloody stump of her neck, plainly uncomfortable with this new ability. I couldn't be sure I saw anyone that looked like me. There were a few flowing robes here and there, but I wasn't certain they were seekers. That might have just been their fashion. The thick crowd made it impossible to do much, but trudged toward the golden gates. I did notice some new arrivals materialize in the middle of the throng, startling their new neighbors. I'm not sure my arrival was met with any protests. I had been too startled for much in way of self-awareness. I felt a shove from my left side. A new supplicant had arrived. A slicing pain erupted in my torso. I could feel the cold steel digging into my flesh. I turned to frown at this effrontery, and immediately my words turned to stone in my throat. Standing beside me was some sort of Gothic priestess, her black, spiderweb-like robes barely concealing the details of her voluptuous body. Her exposed skin was just as pale as her inadequately obscure flesh. Her wide, haunting eyes, exquisitely decorated with black makeup, were enough to send chills down my spine, but I was immediately distracted by the thrush of metal blades protruding from her hairless head, poking through her shroud. Quickly, I realized the rest of her body was covered with the same sort of blades, though they were folded down, hugging her skin. One had apparently protruded enough to slice a gash in my side. "Devil's delight," she crowed. "By my will and through the power granted by the infinite darkness, I have transcended the misbegotten world and arrived here." Her wild grin punctuated the feverish look in her eyes. I could not find the strength nor the fortitude to look away. Her presence alone curdled the air. Her expression softened, and she peered at me with firm dispassion, as a snake might when sizing up its next meal. "I'm Thluma," she declared. "And who might you be?" Julian," I offered meekly, her face twisted into mockery. "Then I'm Norma, though no one calls me that anymore." She looked me up and down with obvious disapproval. "You really go by your birth name?" She threw her head back and cackled. "It takes all kinds, I guess." She transfixed me with a bewildered gaze. "You really did it the hard way? Clean living, aesthetic lifestyle, endless meditation, that sort of thing?" "Well, yes." She cackled again. "Then I have to commend your effort. I never had the patience for any of that. I only worked hard at finding shortcuts." Dreading her response, I asked anyway, "So how did you do it?" She shrugged. "I'm a seeker. A little black magic here, a little witchcraft there, but lately I've been more about ritual magic." Coyly, she swept her eyes over her curvaceous form. "Mostly sex magic. You ever try that?" "No," I retorted. "My current path is celibate." She shook her head gently as a deep-throated chortling slowly grew in volume. "Oh, you poor deluded fool. Life is for living. The universe offers us many pleasures. It doesn't want us to forego its bounty. It wants us to be happy." She clucked her tongue as she beheld my simple brown robe. "You were really living life on hard mode, weren't you? Granted, your soul is less stained than mine, but what does it matter if we end up in the same place?" I strained to keep my anger in check. "I can't believe someone like you is allowed into heaven." "Not only allowed, but welcomed," she gushed, flinging her arms upward. the only place where there was any freedom of movement. You've heard the saying, right? There are many paths, but only one destination. I pinched my eyes closed and tried to ignore my surroundings. I had learned to tune out the real world during meditation, and I tried desperately to do it here. The crushing horde, their varying but uniformly awful smells, and the caterwauling of the recently deceased made it impossible. I opened my eyes to see Thulima still standing next to me, her eyes wide with gleeful insanity. "So what was your trigger?" I asked. "What finally let you ascend?" "Nothing I haven't done many times before," she replied. "Just the latest virgin male and the usual profane ritual." She fixed me with an arresting glare. "Do you know how difficult it is to find virgins these days?" I finally had to resort to unemployable shootings. You wouldn't believe how much time I had to spend trawling through anonymous image boards, looking for gullible chumps. I've sent out so many nudes, I sometimes feel like a whore, but it paid off in the end. I could feel this conversation tarnishing my soul, but she continued. So there I was with my latest patsy, bouncing rhythmically on top of him. He had a really big schlong, this one, and we had one of the biggest simultaneous orgasms I remember having. She cocked her head to one side. Maybe that was it. Most of them come too fast, and then try to lie about it. A wicked grin spread across her face. Finally, it was all worth it. Here I am. I stared ahead glumly, lost for a response. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You made it too, didn't you?" "I can't believe heaven rewards people like you," I growled. "You're the opposite of everything I consider to be enlightenment." "I told you," she cheered. "Life is to be lived. The universe wants you to be happy, not all bottled up inside, denying your nature. There was never any reason to be so hard on yourself. I guess I don't understand the nature of heaven. I finally had to conclude. I noticed the golden gates had grown closer, and felt grateful that this ordeal was coming to an end soon. I felt myself shoved brutally from behind, followed by a feral roar. Closing my eyes and cowered. I dreaded whatever came next, surprised to hear it was several female voices bellowing similarly. As that settled down, someone shouted into my ear, "Move aside, peasant." I opened my eyes to see Thulima staring behind me, her eyes wide with wonder, her face filled with delight. I turned around to see a barrel-shaped chest covered in animal skins. I craned my neck upward to receive the head perched atop those shoulders. His ferocious glare put Thulima to shame. In a day filled with horrors and depredations, this was more than I could stand. I said, "Move aside. The new Lord of Darkness demands it." His chest swelled another size. Menacing poured from under his barbarian clothing. "I can't." I shot back. "None of us can move." "Oh, you'll move," he snapped. "All of you will." I noticed his hand held the ends of several rusted chains. Tracing them back, I was startled to see they were all connected to a coterie of emaciated, shivering women, standing behind him. Each wore clothes shredded to nearly nothing. Underneath, their skin rippled with welts, bruises, and bloody wounds. The chains attached to spiked collars around their necks, but the spikes were on the inside, digging into their flesh. The looks on their faces bewildered me. They all looked clearly broken and traumatized, but each had an incongruous grin, the happiness of their smile clashing with the fright on their faces and the terror in their eyes. "What in blazes did you do to them?" I challenged, finally finding my voice. "Exactly what I promised," he thundered. "They knew the path was filled with torment and pain. They entered this covenant willingly, and I delivered. Yeah!" One of the women shouted, her voice gurgling. "Here we are in front of heaven." "Leave him alone," shouted another. He kept his word. "Finally, it's all worth it." He leaned toward me. His face was only inches from mine. A foul odor poured from his mouth. Some of it may have come from sour blood, but most of it was indescribable. Gagging involuntarily, I tried to pull back. "And now," he stated simply, "stand aside." He pushed my shoulder. To my surprise, I stumbled to the side. Looking around, I realized that the crowd had somehow parted in front of me. Grinning smugly, he stomped forward, giving the chains a jerk. His women stumbled, then followed him. One fell to the ground. She cried out in pain. He turned around, his eyes furious, and yanked her chain. "On your feet, hag!" She shrieked pitifully as she struggled to find her footing. He marched on, oblivious to her pain. "Make way for the new Lord of Darkness," he roared, slipping to the narrow passage that had formed in the multitude. As the crowd cheered him, he and his entourage passed through, the path closing up behind them. "Wow!" Thelema exulted. "Can you believe that?" Not for a moment. I mumbled. So many of my assumptions about the nature of God and the universe crumbled as I pondered them helplessly. "The audacity of his path," she gushed. "Torture, blood, magic. You have to admire the bravery." "Do I?" I muttered. Thelema peered at me again. This time, it felt like genuine sympathy, which I found unsettling. "Don't take it so hard," she advised. "You made it here as much as he did. After all, there may be many paths, but the destination is the same." I couldn't wrap my mind around what I had just witnessed. The Gnostics taught that God was completely indifferent to our plight, but never had the evidence been cast into such sharp relief. There had to be an answer for all of this, and I hoped it was through those golden gates. "If it's all the same to you," I said, turning to Thelema, "I'd rather just focus on getting through those gates and finding out what heaven is like." Thelema looked wistful. "Suit yourself," she replied, "though I was hoping to see you on the other side. I was looking forward to exploring this new territory with you." I frowned as I looked her up and down. "I don't think you're my type." "And what type would that be?" she shot back. "Beautiful? Willing? Spiritually centered? I think we have a lot in common. Maybe someone that didn't look like an unfolded Swiss Army knife." I groused. She sighed huffily. "I thought you were different," she snapped. "But you're like all the rest. You can't even see past the surface." I turned away from her angrily, focusing my gaze on the golden gates, which grew ever closer. Soon, I told myself this ordeal would be over. Something shoved my right side. That was quickly followed by fervent gurgling and repeated rounds of vomiting. After everything else that had happened today, it seemed like the least of my worries. Following a round of violent coughing, my ears were suddenly blasted by a high-pitched caterwauling. I redoubled my efforts to ignore what was going on around me. "Mommy," the high-pitched voice screeched. "I want my mommy." I turned to look. Next to me stood a little girl, her clothes drenched, the braids in her strawberry blonde hair unraveling. She shivered uncontrollably. "What happened to you?" I asked her, unable to maintain my detachment. The little girl's face turned glum. "Mommy said she was going to make everything better," she related. Then she drove off the bridge and into the water. The little girl looked around frantically. "Where is she? She could be hurt." I pinched my eyes closed and tried to keep my composure. "Everything is better now, honey. I heard Thelema say, you're going to heaven." The little girl sniffed. I opened my eyes to see her stare, unblinking. "What about my baby brother? Is he okay?" "He already in heaven, dear," Thelema assured. "Babies go straight to heaven." A small relieved smile cracked over the little girl's face. "And what about my mommy?" Thelema didn't answer. I turned my head and looked down. If your mom deliberately drove you all off a bridge, then she's definitely not going to heaven. The little girl's eyes grew wide with horror. A gurgling cry turned into a sustained scream. "Mommy," she wailed. "Why did you have to tell her that?" Thelema growled. What was I supposed to say? I countered. "It's the truth." "No, it's your truth," Thelema snarled, "and not a very nice one." The little girl continued to bawl. Thelema's indignant glare bored into me like twin jets of fire. "Haven't you figured out just how little you understand about the nature of the universe?" I started to speak, but my throat choked up on the words. The little girl was now beating on me futilely with her tiny fists, screaming, "No, no, no," over and over. I turned to look at Thelema, but she was staring at the gates of heaven, a sour expression on her face. I exhaled sharply and resumed staring in that direction. Soon, all this would be over. Finally, I passed through the golden gates. From underneath, I realized with a start that they weren't golden at all. They may have shown the sunlight, but not only were they painted white, but the gloss had worn away over time, leaving dull streaks and patches. The only golden color came from the sunlight and the unearthly shade of the sky. I sighed heavily and continued to shuffle forward. Soon I noticed ropes suspended on metallic stanchions. I hadn't noticed when those had started. They guided me along a path that finally terminated in a row of simply constructed tables, cheap-looking chairs strewn along their length. I sat in the first empty one I found, meeting the weary glare of the first angel I had ever laid eyes on. Far from filling me with awe, he looked like a cynical civil servant, complete with an ill-fitting, slightly glowing robe. Sweeping my eyes along the tables, I noticed the other angels looked similar. Thulima sat in the chair next to mine, her eyes shooting me an icy, disapproving glare. The angel assigned to me shuffled papers that seemed to be made of pure light, but on closer inspection, looked like endless spreadsheets. His simple name tag read Peter. Wow! I exulted. Are you the St. Peter of legend? His heavy-lidded eyes glared at me. Of course not, he answered. There are a lot of Peters in heaven, just like where you came from. He peered closely at his papers. Earth. Ugh. My condolences. I heard sniffling to my right. Next to me sat the little girl. Her angel reached across the table to hold her hand. Don't be afraid, young one, she cooed. Your pain is over. Where's my mommy? She simpered. She'll be along soon enough, the angel declared. Until then, you can wait inside with your baby brother. She looked up with a start. He's okay. He's fine, the angel assured her, and he really wants to see you. The little girl looked back eagerly, a broad smile on her face. The angel took a shining necklace and put it over the little girl's head. In an instant, golden light flowed over her, repairing her torn clothing, healing all her wounds, and grooming her perfection. The little girl's face beamed with beatific joy. You may enter, the angel explained. Follow the light. You'll know where to go. Without another word, the little girl stood up and walked away, quickly disappearing from sight. I can't find your name here, Peter announced. Were you expected? What do you mean expected? I replied, I've been meditating for years, and finally I ascended. Peter gave me a disapproving glare. A volunteer, huh? Almost as bad as a suicide. What do you mean? I asked, taken aback. Are you at least part of an organized group? He asked. Not really a member, no. I explained. I pay to meditate in their central hall, but I've never formally joined. They've asked me to, but I kept turning them down. Peter shook his head and pinched the bridge of his nose with his fingers. Then you have a lot of paperwork to fill out for your visa application. Visa? I asked quietly. I looked down to see a thick stack of forms laying on the table in front of me. I wasn't sure how long they had been there. Peter pushed them closer to me. You can take these down to the study hall and fill them out. When you're done, come back. We need to keep this line moving. The dead have to fill out forms to go to heaven? I guffawed incredulously. No, Peter snapped. Only the ascended. If you come here before your time, there's a lot of paperwork involved. Normally, churches do that on your behalf. Did you think organized religion exists for no good reason? My mouth hung open. I was unable to form a reply. Wow, you really are the worst. I heard Thulima say. She was glaring at me as if she had found me stuck to the bottom of her shoe. You had no idea what you were getting into at all. You belong to an organized group? I scoffed. Of course, she snapped. The necromantic cotillion. You think I stuck all these blades into myself. She swept her hands over her form. This takes teamwork. Wow, you know literally nothing, Peter snarled. Another form appeared on top of my stack. Here's a simplified checklist to help you ease into these forms. I quickly scanned over the checklist. It says, here I have to pick a profession? Well, of course you do, Peter retorted, throwing his hands up in the air. Do you think I volunteered for this exalted task of having to deal with you? Look at me. This could be your future. He leaned over slightly and looked me in the eye. If heaven was better than being alive, people would be committing suicide left and right to get here. Then where would that leave us? I picked up the checklist and looked at them closely, mostly to shield myself from Peter's penetrating glare. I always thought I wanted to be a bodhisattva. Ha! Thelema interjected. She was now wearing a shiny necklace and bathed in a golden glow. All the metalwork impaled in her skin was gone, with her health restored. She looked more beautiful than ever. Gone was the serpentine look in her eyes. They now radiated pure warmth, pure love. I felt a lump rise in my throat. What happened to all your piercings? I asked. They're gone, obviously, she retorted. It's called penance. Are you telling me you've never heard of prescribing pain for religious purposes? I always felt that was so unnecessary and brutal. I opined. She stood up and started to walk away. Just one more thing you're wrong about. She slapped the back of my head as she passed by, causing my upper body to lurch forward. I can't believe I was ever attracted to you. She quickly blended in with the crowd and vanished. I stared after her hotly for a moment, then turned back. Peter was unsuccessfully trying to stifle his laughter. He lowered his hand and smirked at me. What was that all about? I growled. Didn't you know? Peter asked. Bodhisattva is one of the worst jobs there is. You have to descend back to the lower realms to be a teacher or messiah, though that usually ends with being burned alive for heresy or nailed to a cross or some other awful fate. I resumed reading the checklist. What other sorts of jobs are there? Peter snickered. We won't know until you fill out the forms. But based on what I've seen so far, you're likely to end up on welfare in a high-density housing project. A chill shot down my spine. That sounds like hell. That is hell, Peter revealed. Hell Towers is the largest housing development we have. Block after block of skyscraper apartment buildings, each one more brutalist than the last. A wave of ennui washed over me. My hand fell limply to the table, taking the checklist with it. This isn't at all what I expected. So, Peter shot back. Who died and made you princess? I noticed the two angels sitting near Peter were staring at me and laughing. We're all dealing with this terrible creation in the best way we know how. Peter continued. You don't have all the answers, and neither do we. I closed my eyes as I felt tears well up inside me. In many ways, heaven was worse than the place I left. I think I prefer to go back. Peter snorted derisively. Now he gets it. The air suddenly changed around me. My eyes shot open. I was back in the temple, sitting on my cushion. I found myself surrounded by the other acolytes, staring at me expectantly, wide grins on all their faces. You ascended, one exulted. The crowd cheered loudly. How did you know? I asked as applause died down. Because you stopped moving, another revealed. And you were giving off a golden light the whole time. I averted my eyes. The tears I've been fighting started to flow. What's wrong? One asked. You didn't go to hell, did you? I don't know. I answered. I didn't get that far. I think it was some sort of purgatory. The acolytes exchanged worried looks. What are you talking about? Ascension isn't what you think it is. I revealed. Don't bother trying. It's just big crowds and a lot of waiting. I got up to leave. They stared after me with puzzled expressions. I turned back once before exiting the central hall, and the forms are incomprehensible. That was the last time I ever stepped foot in the temple, and I don't plan to go back to there or any other church. I've been preparing most of my life to reach the other side, and found it more terrifying than I can comprehend. And now, I don't know what to do with myself. Should I party until I'm broke? Should I stick myself with pins and needles? Should I join the military and die heroically? Hermeticism has long declared as above, so below. Only now do I realize the full horror behind that statement. I hope this answers everyone's questions about my ascension. Now you know the brutal truth, that it was nothing worth striving for. And hopefully you understand why I'm now dedicated to living the longest life I can. Because this world, as awful as it is far better than the alternative. Story 5. I'm a delivery driver. Last night, the order wasn't food. It was me. I'm a food delivery guy. Nothing glamorous. just delivering food and collecting cash. But hey, it pays the bills. I usually take the late night shifts because people tend to tip more after midnight. The only problem? Late night runs can get weird. I've had drunks try to hug me out of nowhere, drugged up guys staring at me like they want to fight. Or worse. One time, I rang the bell at 2:30 a.m. and a fat guy answered completely naked, just standing there waiting for his order. But nothing ever topped what happened to me last week. It started with an order on my delivery app, Night Crave. Tagline: for every craving, no matter how late. I never thought that line would haunt me later. The order was simple, 1 pepperoni pizza and a Coke. The tip was huge. I didn't even think twice before accepting. I picked up the food and followed the GPS to an unfamiliar neighborhood on the edge of town. Street lights were flickering like they hadn't worked properly in years. The air was colder than normal, almost biting. Everything in me told me not to go there, but then my phone buzzed. Another tip added. That was enough for me to keep going. The house looked wrong. 2 stories tall, porch sagging, completely dark. No lights, no glow from inside. I rang the bell. Nothing. Rang again. Still nothing. Finally, I knocked and said, "Excuse me, I'm from Night Crave with your order." After 10 minutes of silence, my phone buzzed. A message from the customer. "Leave the food by the door." I thought it was weird, but hey, people are antisocial. I placed the food down and was about to leave when I noticed something. The house wasn't just dark. It was burnt, charred wood, blackened walls, like it caught fire years ago. My stomach nodded. That's when another message came in. "Wait, I want my food in my hands." Handed to me. The front door creaked open slightly. Against my better judgment, I picked up the bag and stepped closer. A foul, burnt smell hit me in the face. Hello?" I called. At first, silence. Then movement in the shadows. A hand slid into view. Thin, pale, fingers bent like broken twigs. Before I could react, the hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. The hand was ice. Fucking cold. I screamed, yanked myself free with every ounce of strength, and stumbled backward off the porch. The door slammed shut behind me, rattling the frame. The Coke can rolled into the shadows. I didn't care. I bolted to my bike and sped off like the devil himself was after me. In my mirror, I saw him move in the yard. Too fast. Too unnatural. The figure stopped at the edge of the house. And then it waved. I didn't stop until I was back home. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a nightmare. But the mark on my wrist told me otherwise. It looked burnt, not like fire, but like a handprint seared into my skin. I crashed at my girlfriend's place for a couple of nights. Told her what happened. She tried to calm me down. But then she got a message from her friend. A news article. The headline read, "Young woman in her early 20s dies in suspected self-immolation following sexual assault. Alleged attacker unidentified." The photo attached? The same house. Smoke-stained walls. Burnt windows. The girl had been a medical student, living alone. A delivery guy had assaulted her. She survived the attack, but not the shame. She doused herself in kerosene and set herself on fire 6 years ago. And here's the thing. Another rider shared a screenshot of his app. That same house? Still active. Still placing orders. I stopped working late shifts. For 2 weeks, I slept with the lights on, double-checking every lock. But curiosity eats at you, doesn't it? One night, I opened the app just to check. Right then, I got a notification. An active order from that house. I froze, opened it. My screen glitched, then rebooted. When it came back on, the app said, "Your order's on its way." I wasn't even on shift. I hadn't accepted anything, but the trip was assigned to me. And in the reflection of my phone screen, for just a split second, I swear, I saw her, a woman behind me, skin cracked like burnt paper, hair smoldering at the ends, watching me. I panicked, shut my phone off, and ran back to my girlfriend's. For a month, nothing happened, except the app kept reinstalling itself. I'd uninstall it, and the next day it would be back. Then tonight, the notification changed. The order wasn't for pizza and Coke. It said, "One delivery rider. Delivery instructions. Come inside." And then my phone buzzed again. "Arriving at your doorstep at any moment now." But I never accepted any order. I never got on my bike. So, who's making delivery? Wait! Someone's knocking on my door. Story 6. My hometown's claim to fame was a museum of oddities. I think I'm fated to die there. The town I grew up in was strange. That statement typically garners a fair bit of narrative intrigue when I say it in person, but peculiar childhoods seem to be alarmingly common among the contributors that skulk about this particular forum. So allow me to be more specific. My hometown was professionally strange. 5.5 square miles of humble farmland that doubled as a hotbed for the unexplainable and the uncanny. Strangeness was our lifeblood, the beating heart of our economy, attracting tourists from 3 states over with rumors of the closely kept secrets lurking within our one-of-a-kind showroom, an orphanage for the enigmatically aberrant that was simply titled Curbside Emporium. That strangeness used to be the love of my life. Now, I'm starting to suspect it'll be my tomb. But hey, it isn't all bad news. At least I'll finally be a part of it. That is what I wanted, right? The way my parents tell the story, Curbside Emporium was my first true passion, something that really put life behind my eyes. To borrow a lovingly dumb expression from my dad, the mystique of the various oddities seemingly bonked my consciousness into second gear. Makes it sound like I was an exceptionally dull toddler before that day, glazed over and fashionably disinterested, until I glimpsed Miss Sapphire, the world's only sparkling blue tapeworm, and then Viola I was awakened, not to veer too far off track. But have you ever heard of the Mutter Museum? It's a lovely little gallery nestled in a quaint section of Philadelphia's downtown, collecting and curating a wonderful assortment of oddities. The lady whose body turned to soap, the world's largest colon, a plaster cast of 2 conjoined twins, Curbside Emporium, and by extension my hometown, are certainly comparable. The amount of strange thing stuff within a single location, the raw density of it all, inspired a deep thrum of nostalgia within me when I visited the Mutter Museum for my cousin's wedding a few months back. Yes, you can in fact get married there. Why in God's name would you want to? Well, if it reminded me of home, it must have reminded my cousin and his high school sweetheart home, too. And that's probably as good a reason as any to select a venue. Plus, Curbside Emporium doesn't have a reception hall. There's one key difference between the two. However, the Mutter Museum imports its strangeness from all over the globe. My hometown, we've never had a need to outsource like that. Strangeness springs up around us like weeds, whether we like it or not. Let's put it this way. Whatever cosmic radiation stirs within waters of the Bermuda Triangle, that same radiation seems to stir within the soil of our small, podunk stretch of land. Assuming you believe the anomalous exhibitions aren't a series of well-intentioned hoaxes, of course. As a kid, that thought never even crossed my mind. It felt like a lie too cruel to even exist. Family and friends quickly learned that disbelief was akin to blasphemy in my eyes. My parents sidestepped many a screaming match between my older sister and me by prophylactically outlawing Curbside Emporium talk at the dinner table. Begrudgingly, I complied, as long as she didn't disparage those consecrated halls. Then I wouldn't argue she had shit for brains. Tit for tat. To be clear, though, she was right to be skeptical. First off, the unassuming layout and hokey decor didn't exactly scream scientific integrity. It was the second tallest building in town, squeezed tightly between the fire station and our local burger joint, marked by a piece of ostentatious neon signage that rose unnecessarily high into the air. I loved pretty much everything about Curbside Emporium, excluding that damn sign. It made no earthly sense. The nearest interstate was 10 miles away, and the tallest building in town was the adjacent fire station. Who was the elevation for? Birds? Angels? Distracted, low-flying biplane pilots? Not only that, but the fluorescent green bulbs cost a small fortune and were prone to malfunction. For them all to work at once was nothing short of a miracle. The first are burnout for what seemed like my entire freshman year of high school, making the sign read Curbside Emporium, which, to be perfectly frank, just sounds like a very odd, very specific porn outlet. Now, I get it was meant to be symbolic, not practical, a signal to visitors that Curbside Emporium was clearly the crown jewel of our otherwise no-name town. Still, the building itself was in a state of perpetual disrepair. Why not siphon money from the sign towards fixing the crumbling foundation or eradicating the carpetworm larvae that chewed up the floorboards every winter? But I digress. Disrepair didn't dampen the magic. Not for me, anyway. Walking through those oversized double doors, those towering slabs of dark oak that divided the dullness of the real world from a brilliant shimmer of dreamlike possibility, never failed to lift my spirits. The lobby set the tone for the showroom to come, with a palpable air of mystery and abundance of kitschy charm. Shadows flickered in the dim lighting provided by scattered, gold-plated oil lamps and a centrally hung electric candelabra, with telescoping rows of gold teeth that glowed above the swathes of eager patrons. The color scheme leaned heavily on deep reds and dull golds, which made the room look simultaneously regal and cheap. A burgundy-colored carpet that could easily hide a spilled glass of Merlot or a bloodstain within its fibers. Gold tassels on the curtains separating the lobby from the showroom that matched the gold threads embroidered into the curtain itself. Unlabeled knickknacks devoured every inch of wall space. At first glance, the ornamentation could appear chaotic. The more you looked, however, the more it seemed to fit together like pieces to a puzzle, implying some perverse method to the madness. Feathers dangled off the rim of a dream catcher to fill the U-shaped emptiness framed by the antlers of a taxidermy deer's head below. The borders of scenic painting fit snugly between the legs of an antique artisan's bench, which the owners had bolted upright, extending laterally from the wall behind where Mr. Baker operated the ticket counter. Mr. Baker, to my knowledge, is the only confirmed employee of Curbside Emporium, a gaunt, joyless corpse of man, always sporting a black tuxedo, an off-white button-down, and a golden cummerbund. Tickets cost at least $10, although you're technically permitted and subtly encouraged to give over 10, as long as that amount is an even number. Mr. Baker won't accept odd-number donations. Most people pay 10 on the dot, but I've seen bills as large as 100 deposited into the enormous gold cash register by Mr. Baker's skeletal, liver-spotted hands. Why would you pay over 10? Well, the simple answer is that it's good karma to support local business. There are more convoluted answers, of course. Baseless conspiracies spurred on by the message written in gold lettering above the curtain that leads to the showroom. The more of yourself that you give, the more of yourself that you'll see. Once you push through the thick crimson fabric and enter the cavernous showroom, the Gilded Age aesthetic disappears completely. Instead, the presentation is very plain and down to brass tacks, with wood panel flooring, eggshell-colored walls, and natural light provided through a trio of large windows along the wall farthest from the curtain. To me, this sharp contrast has always felt logical. The lobby establishes mystique via its flamboyant interior design. The showroom, in comparison, needs no crutch. The exhibitions speak for themselves. I've already mentioned my favorite, Miss Sapphire. Don't get me wrong, I'm no tapeworm enthusiast. The creature's bluish, crystalline exterior did little to mitigate the bubbling nausea I experienced when I imagined all 32 inches of it squishing around some poor cow's intestines. No, I was enraptured by the idea of it being one of kind. That idiosyncratic quality really struck a chord with me. It made the creature seem powerful and oddly important. There's only one extra long, blue-tinged tapeworm, and hey, you're looking right at it. Bow your head and pay your respects to the first and last of its kind. Not to mention the way they displayed Miss Sapphire helped romanticize the creature. Its segmented body held gracefully in the air by lines of nearly invisible string, with a watercolor illustration of a starry night attached to the inside of its glass box acting as a scenic backdrop, which I think was meant to evoke the image of traditional Chinese dragon flying over the countryside, rather than a parasite swimming through filth. And that's just a sample. There's the blackened bones of a man and a boy, which presumably fell from the sky and landed in our town back in the 80s, although no one actually witnessed descent. No missing person reports could explain them. No commercial or private planes were traveling overhead early that morning. A young woman, Erica, discovered the skeletons as she was walking her dog. As dawn broke, she saw them lying side by side on Curbside Emporium's front lawn, holding hands, vacant sockets peering up at the unseen. Onlookers assumed they were father and son, based on size difference, their clasped hands and their narrow hips. Once the sheriff had been sufficiently convinced that they represented something anomalous, rather than something acutely murderous, the strange bodies were added to the collection, and since Erica was the first to lay eyes on them, Mr. Baker granted her the distinct honor of naming them. She went with the first thing that came to mind, cheerfully admitting her lack of creativity. Thus, she christened the bones Atticus and Finch, having just finished To Kill a Mockingbird for high school English. Of course, Atticus and Jem would have technically been more appropriate, given that the remains were canonically related, a father and a son, but she claimed those names didn't feel right. No one pushed back against the decision. She found them, so the responsibility of naming them was hers, and hers alone. That's the rule. You get a plaque engraved with your name posted below the exhibition. 2. There's a framed black and white photograph showing a farmer listed simply as Jim, leaning on a downturned pitchfork planted in the ground like a flag, beside a small, circular patch of earth blurred with motion, as if spinning. He named the phenomenon fluster on account of the soil's toilet-like churning. Supposedly, his boots sank into it like quicksand when he stumbled upon the anomaly, only lasted for a day or two before the ground's physical properties spontaneously reverted to normal. There's Philip and his wooden flute that, for a brief time when played, supposedly emitted noises that sounded like human speech in an unknown language, rather than its normal whistling, more than a little disturbed. Philip happily gifted the instrument to Curbside Emporium, but refused to play along with the tradition, offering no name for the anomaly. According to the mythos, when Mr. Baker prompted him a fourth time, unwilling to take the thing off his hands without a name, Philip replied, "Listen, I don't want to." From then on, the flute became known as Listen, I Don't Want to, which had an oddly appropriate ring to it. Given the backstory, every bit of it was magic. Every story, every relic, every inch of that place spoke to me. So, when I was finally old enough to wander about town without supervision, my mission became clear. I was going to find something anomalous. I was going to have a plaque with my name carved on it. I was going to earn my place in the showroom. In the end, I succeeded in achieving those goals, but only partially. I discovered something wildly inexplicable, a story worthy of Curbside Emporium. I don't believe I'll be getting my plaque, though not in the way I imagined it, at least when I first conceived of my so-called expeditions. They were not such a lonely affair. Sometimes I had more than a dozen kids following my lead, digging holes, overturning rocks, looking toward the sky for the first glimpses of more heaven-rejected bones, hoping to catch wind of an oddity, for them, though it was a fad, something to be discarded once a new, shinier hobby came along. Years passed, and the team shrank. The number of kids I considered friends dwindled into the single digits. By the time I turned 10, it was just me and Riley, and he only came because I was so damn insistent. Eventually, even Riley had become fed up with the pursuit, but unlike the others, we remained friends, despite our diverging interests. Honestly, my parents were more worried about my social situation than I was. They didn't want to witness their son tread the path of the outcast, consumed by what they considered a fruitless passion. Sure, I missed the banter, missed the sense of belonging. 2, the rejection was more than a little painful. There was an upside to the solitude, though, something I didn't mention to my parents. If I were the only person on an expedition, that meant I didn't have to share the credit when I inevitably found something. More plaque space for my name, more glory for me. I could tell my fanaticism scared them. There was in the way their faces contorted when I gushed about Curbside Emporium, all shifting eyes and half smiles, like they didn't want to support the hobby. But they didn't want to strike me down, either. Unspoken prayers that the fire would go out just as long as they didn't give it any more oxygen. I certainly didn't soothe their concern when I returned from one of my first solo expeditions with a discovery in my backpack, beaming with pride. I can't believe it. Honestly, I can't believe it. But I think I found something, the first of its kind. Do you have Mr. Baker's number? I need to donate it right away before it gets rotten. I'm going to name him Volcano Bug. I think. The blunt but forceful odor of decay exploded from my backpack as I unzipped it and unveiled my discovery. Reluctantly, I allowed my father to examine the dead critter, holding it upside down by the tip of its tail and spinning it. Enough. Dad, we gotta call him. We gotta call him quick. I pleaded. If it wasn't obvious from the specimen alone, the shrill anxiety creeping into my voice likely gave me away. Needless to say, we didn't phone Mr. Baker regarding the salamander corpse imperfectly coated in Sharpie ink. Later that evening, when my tears had dried, I admitted to drawing over the creature's scales posthumously, desperate to find an anomaly at any cost. The only thing that saved me from a much more significant punishment was that they believed me, or mostly believed me, when I claimed I hadn't killed the lizard specifically to fuel the lie, which was true, by the way. I'd stumbled upon the body, face down, stuck in the small crevice between the sidewalk and the nearby dirt. From there, the scheme crystallized quickly. I feverishly went to work, watching myself scrape the marker over its brittle flesh like my mind was outside my body, lost within some terrible fugue state, a soul possessed. So, when I finally found my anomaly as opposed to fabricating one, I knew I had to be absolutely, irrevocably sure of its strangeness before I told anyone else, especially my parents. That discovery would come 4 years later. I was trekking along the eastern edge of town, engulfed in the song Zero by the Smashing Pumpkins blaring from my new wraparound headphones, a gift I'd received for my 14th birthday the week prior. Technically speaking, I shouldn't have been searching there. The strangeness of my hometown did not immunize it from life's harsh realities. We, like many of Pennsylvania's small communities, struggle with heroin abuse, and the poor souls who succumbed to the drug siren call insulated themselves on our town's eastern perimeter, injecting within the safety of its rundown infrastructure. My parents forbade me from wandering around that area, especially since I was alone most of the time. Naturally, I still searched the eastern side of town periodically, ignoring the agreed-upon restriction without a second thought. How could I resist? To know that there was a part of town unexplored, potentially harboring an anomaly that would have driven me up a fucking wall. I couldn't limit my search. That said, I didn't want them to worry, so I pretended to honor their request. When I found it, it wasn't what I expected. It couldn't be seen, couldn't be heard. No, my beautiful anomaly was something you felt. The air was cool, but it seethed with a hidden electricity of an impending storm, though the sky was bright and cloudless. The soles of my feet ached from traversing the crumbling sidewalk, with its uneven cracks and jagged slopes. The nearest house was a quarter-mile down the road, an empty ranchero with mostly boarded-up windows that served as a map marker. Once I reached that dusty ghost of a home, even I knew it was time to turn around. I was gazing up at the sky, that perfectly empty blue abyss, when I felt it. All of a sudden, my heartbeat turned rabid. Wild, boundless fear gnawed at the base of my skull. Sweat dripped down my torso by the bucketful, pouring from me at a rate that seemed liable to send me to hospital. Critically dehydrated, starved kidneys screaming for water. It was all so automatic. I leapt backwards, sneaker catching on a crack in the terrain, nearly caused me to tumble to the broken ground ass first. My mind attempted to catch up with my body, scanning the horizon, eyes hunting for whatever threat had sent my nervous system into manic overdrive. A flock of blackbirds cawed somewhere above me. Wind blustered over my skin, turning my sweat icy. The electricity writhed within the atmosphere, making the hairs on my arms stand at attention, but there were still no visible signs of an imminent storm. No visible signs of anything. Actually, the entire scene was motionless, bland, and docile. It didn't make sense. It didn't match what I felt. Where was the danger? What in God's name had I just become attuned to? That's when it hit me. Pangs of excitement thumped within my chest. Whatever this is, it could be my anomaly, I thought. So, against my instincts, I crept forward, tiptoed over the weeds, springing from the shattered sidewalk slowly, carefully. My fear rose accordingly. Every step inspired another ounce of terror, but for the life of me, I couldn't determine why. One more step, and my hands trembled. Two more steps, and my vision softened, blurring, dimming. Three more, and I'd reached my limit. I physically couldn't force myself further. Once again, I scanned my surroundings. It must be right here. If I can't push myself forward, this is it. It's got to be right in front of me. I peered down. At first, all I saw was a normal, thoroughly unremarkable square of sidewalk. But that's just it. The concrete was normal, uncracked, clean, no invading shrubbery, no cigarette butts, no brown crystal shards that once formed a beer bottle. It was perfectly normal, so much so that it was distinctly out of place. I squatted down, sat on my haunches, and inspected it closer. Watched the damn thing like I was waiting for it to flinch, and thus would be required by the laws of the cosmos to divulge its arcane secrets. After 10 minutes, my calves started to burn, so I sat down and crossed my legs, still observing potential anomaly with retrospectively embarrassing level of intensity, never once letting my eyes wander. Hours passed. The perfect sidewalk refused to flinch, and I still couldn't step on it without experiencing immediate, mind-melting panic. Trust me, I tried. As the sun dipped down, threatening night, I considered leaving, but the story of Jim and his flush dirt flashed through my mind, and I recalled a phenomenon had spontaneously disappeared after a day or so. That fact kept me tightly glued to the ground. I wouldn't allow it to slip through my fingers. The thought of missing my opportunity made me feel decidedly ill. I just needed to figure out what I was looking at, or, at the very least, determine how to document it. As if the universe heard my prayers, a line of black ants emerged from the dirt and began silently traversing the blemish-free concrete, seemingly unbothered by whatever was holding me back. I watched them with bated breath. They started their march at the left-hand corner, closest to me, continuing diagonally across the sidewalk. Suddenly, the one leading the charge pivoted course, although there was nothing blocking their path. The turn was awkward, unnatural. The insect reared on its hind two legs and spun its body 90 degrees to the right. When the ants trailing behind the first reached that same spot, they pivoted too, identically. I sprung to my feet, biting my nails, starstruck by what was transpiring. The strange pivots continued, all sharp and unprompted, each mirrored by the insect that followed. After a few minutes, a black shape began to materialize, this half circle with two stout, pegged protrusions, outlined by the procession of living dots. More soldiers crawled from the grass, and more of the image emerged. Eventually, the last of the line dragged itself from the earth and onto the concrete. To my absolute astonishment, they seemed to have the perfect number of volunteers. When the last ant pivoted, the first was there to connect them all together. The shape was complete. The march stayed strong, and the pivots continued, so the shape never lost its form. An oval with 3 closely clustered pegs on top, and 2 more distantly spaced pegs on the bottom. A 5-toed cog twisting within the belly of some divine machine. The whoosh of a passing trunk sundered my hypnosis, and I came crashing back to reality. Just seeing it wouldn't be enough. I needed proof. I bolted toward home. I figured I could spare the few seconds required to keep my parents off my back when I didn't come home that night. I swung open the screen door and screamed. Staying at Riley's tonight. Didn't stay for their response. Both cars were parked in the driveway. One of them must have heard me. Plus, they'd been pestering me to spend more time with friends. Anyway, doubt they would have told me no. As the orange glow of twilight began to dim, I sprinted to Riley's. He was the only person I knew who owned a camera, and the only person who still had a faint, lingering interest in Curbside Emporium. I was confident I could convince him to lie to his parents, tell them he was sleeping at my house. With a seemingly heavy heart, he trudged from his stoop to grab his digital camera, agreeing to accompany me across town in the dead of night. Because of me, he'd never return home. Because of my obsession, he'd never sleep in his own bed again. I used to feel ashamed about my involvement in his disappearance. Though as of late, I don't know that I have regrets. Don't know that I have any regrets at all. A shape made of ants? Riley asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Grass crunched beneath our boots. The moonless night provided meager illumination. Still, I could tell Riley was smirking like an idiot. Listen, it'll make more sense when you see it. I replied, but he cut me off. Was the shape a middle finger? That would scare me, too. I sighed, but threw a sheepish grin. Wow, yeah, how'd you know? Dipshit. I chuckled and gave him a gentle push. Ow! Dude, watch it, collarbone. He remarked theatrically. God, man, that was 2 years ago. When am I finally going to be let off the hook? Never. The fracture may be healed, but my mental scars. Lord have mercy, they ache, he said, adopting a southern twang for the last few words. Riley was tall, athletically gifted, and, as far as I could tell, fairly handsome. He had all the ingredients to develop social standing. Because of that, I wasn't too surprised when he started phasing himself out of my expeditions. A tiny bit hurt, yes, but not shocked. Riley was a good friend. He wanted to keep me around, in spite of my desperately uncool interests, so he browbeat me into attempting some more mainstream hobbies. To that end, his family took me snowboarding in the Poconos one winter. I was a goddamn mess on the slopes. Crashed into Riley and sent him chest first into the trunk of a tree, turning his collarbone to rubble. Shattered the bone into 8 distinct pieces. From then on, we agreed to keep our hobbies separate, while remaining friends, common ground be damned. Maybe if you weren't so menopausal, the bone wouldn't have completely disintegrated. Things brittle as fuck. I mean, 8 screws? Really? You needed 8 screws to hold that toothpick together? He pushed me back, laughing. For a moment, I forgot about everything. Curbside emporium, the relentless pursuit of strangeness to call my own, the ants and the shape in the sidewalk. For once, I wasn't trapped in the endless labyrinth of obsession. I just felt warm, unabashedly, transcendently warm, which made what Riley said next hurt that much more. Yeah, well, at least I don't spend all my free time walking around town by myself, searching for make-believe like a loser. Based on his inflection, I don't think he intended the statement to be so pointed. A slip of the tongue. Regardless, the damage was done. I said nothing in response. We were close to our destination. I put my head down and just kept walking. For all his positive traits, Riley had one major flaw. He was stubborn to a fault and prone to doubling down. Oh, come on, man. Don't be a baby. You have to know that it's fake. No scientist is verifying that shit. Whoever owns a place doesn't let anyone test the stuff like a real museum. It's all just, I don't know, smoke and mirrors? Sleight of hand? It's a trick. Dejection curdled in my gut like decades old milk, transforming into an emotion I'd never felt before. Rage. You'll see, asshole, I whispered. Then I ran ahead, out of the grass and onto the sidewalk. We were only a block away. The most vulnerable piece of myself needed to beat him there. Confirm it was real, which would mean that it was all real, and Riley would have no choice but to eat his goddamn words. My sneakers squeaked against the uneven concrete. Crisp night air inflated my lungs by the gulpful. Static electricity sizzled over my exposed skin. As I felt the faintest echoes of fear, I began to slow my pace, sprinting to jogging to just plodding forward while breathing heavy. The fear rose, seething, setting my blood on fire. Eventually, abruptly, I hit an impasse, physically incapable of pressing forward, and there it was, a perfectly normal slab of concrete, a lonely raft adrift in a sea of decay. But there wasn't a single ant to be seen. I felt myself deflate. I could practically hear my confidence hissing like a tea kettle as it leaked through my pores, rising into the night, never to be seen again. Before I could sink too deep in the mires of self-loathing, something startled me. From about 50 feet away, Riley was shouting, but the message made no sense. Hey, who is that? Quickly, I spun around, did a full 360-degree rotation. There was a boarded-up house at the end of the road, the field we'd been walking through to arrive at the eastern edge of town, the flickering street lamps and nothing else. Not a soul to be seen anywhere. Are you all right? He bellowed. Seriously, who the fuck is that? Standing behind you? A little delirious, I shrugged, chuckled, cupped my hands over my mouth. and shouted back at him. Genuinely, I paused for a moment, panting. I have no idea what you're talking about. He started barreling towards me, shoulders angled like a quarterback. All I really felt in that moment was disorientation. That changed once Riley was close enough that I could appreciate his expression under the sickly glow of the street lamps. His eyes were wide. His skin had turned table salt white. The muscles in his face looked taut, almost spastic. Riley was terrified. Moreover, he could see someone on the sidewalk behind me. Someone who made him worry for my safety. Someone who looked dangerous. Right as it all began sinking in, there was a shift in Riley's demeanor. In the blink of an eye, he'd stopped charging, sprinting with abandon one moment, walking gingerly the next. His panic disappeared, leaving his face unsettlingly blank. My head swiveled between the perfect sidewalk and my friend, side to side, back and forth, trying to understand what he was witnessing and what it was doing to him. He was about to pass right by me when I put my hand on his breastbone and held him there. His heart rate was slow, downright languid, but it was incredibly forceful. Each beat practically detonated inside his chest, pulses reverberating up my arm every few seconds. What's happening, Riley? I pleaded. His eyes were open, but only slightly. He's been waiting for me, he stated. Words failed me. Felt like my throat was caving in on itself. The five-toed man says it's my time. I kept my hand on his chest, clasped his wrist in my other hand, and gently began tugging him away. Riley, this was a mistake. We need to go. Briefly, it seemed like I was making headway, although his eyes remained fixed on that perfect bit of sidewalk. His legs were moving with mine, away from whatever was luring him closer. Then I heard the last thing he ever said to me. Don't worry, it'll be your time soon enough. He gripped his digital camera tightly, like it was a stone, and in one smooth motion, sent it crashing into my head. I collapsed, falling from the sidewalk onto the road, groaning, vision swimming. Sticky warmth trickled down my temple. When my eyes focused, all I could see was the night sky, moonless and grim. Riley grabbed my hands and dragged me off the street, back onto the sidewalk, laying me at the foot of the anomaly, the five-toed man, like an offering. The word wait quietly spilled from my lips, but it fell on deaf ears. I saw the silhouette of my best friend arc the bloodstained camera over his shoulder. I didn't even feel an impact. The world just faded away. When I came to, it was morning. The woman who owned our town's pharmacy was kneeling beside me, asking what happened, asking if I was all right, her truck idling nearby. Memories of the night before trickled in painfully, a cheese grater rubbing against my concussed brain. Where's Riley? I muttered. Before the ambulance arrived, I was able to get myself upright. I stumbled to where I thought that perfect bit of sidewalk was. But to my horror, there was nothing. All the concrete was equally dilapidated. Whatever had been there before was gone. Later that week, I found myself in a police station being interrogated about Riley's disappearance. What drugs were you both on? I stared at the officer, eyes wide with disbelief. We weren't on anything. I haven't even had beer before, let alone drugs. He clicked his tongue and shook his head. Really? Y'all were sober? Sober on the east side, taking pictures of yourself in the middle of the night? My heart fell into my stomach like an anvil. What do you mean, pictures? He pulled 4 high-quality printouts from a manila envelope and threw them in front of me. They were all almost identical. We were standing on the sidewalk, arms around each other's shoulders, looking into the lens, only visible from the waist up due to the way the shots were angled. Looking at the empty air above our shoulders made me squirm. In each picture, Riley's face was concealed behind by what appeared to be motion blur. My face, on the other hand, was cleanly visible. I was smiling, blood streaks glinting against the camera's flash. Who could take thousands of pictures? Pictures like these, sober? My voice trailed off. Finally, he asked a question that's plagued my broken psyche for decades. Who's behind the camera, taking the photos? Who else was with you that night? To the officer's frustration, to my parents' utter disappointment, and to Riley's parents' absolute indignation, I didn't have an answer. I didn't have a name to give. I still don't. So I said nothing. Riley was pronounced legally dead 2 years later. The town assumed he got caught up in the drug trade somehow. Kidnapped and killed because he owed the wrong person money. I knew that wasn't true, but I couldn't provide a better truth. So that became his story. But I think I found that better truth. It was inside Curbside Emporium all along. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I attended my cousin's wedding in Philadelphia a few months back. I hadn't planned on attending. As soon as I turned 18, I left Pennsylvania with no intention of returning. Out of the blue, though, my cousin called me, practically begged me to attend, claiming the family missed me. So I relented. Sure, it didn't feel like they missed me at the wedding, though. Everyone leering in my direction with that all too familiar look of thinly veiled disgust. Even my cousin seemed surprised to see me, which was a little bizarre. Only got more bizarre when I thanked him for convincing me to come at the reception. He denied ever calling me in the first place. From there, though, it was already too late. The seal was broken. My trajectory felt inevitable, no matter how much I wanted to resist. Yesterday, I handed Mr. Baker a $100 bill, pulled back the curtain, and walked into the showroom. It wasn't so bad. Not nearly as bad as I imagined it would be, I guess. In fact, the nostalgia was sort of sedating. Took my time wandering around. It was all exactly as I left it. I even grinned when I passed by Miss Sapphire. Eventually, I found myself in front of Atticus and Finch, those blackened, anomalous bones that seemingly fell from the sky in the 80s. It was never my favorite exhibit, so I had no intention of lingering, but a faint shimmer caught my eye. I tried to ignore it, but I still ended up standing in front of the glass, squinting at the shimmer. Don't know how long I just stood there, eyes glazed over and catatonic. I'd never noticed the shimmer before. It certainly couldn't have been new. How could I never have noticed it before? I rubbed my eyes, mashed them around in their sockets until their soft jelly hurt. Even slapped myself across the face once. No matter what I did, though, the shimmer didn't change. The light was reflecting off something buried in Finch, the smaller of the pair, a gleaming drop of silver jutting slightly from his collarbone. There was no denying it. It was a screw. My neck creaked forward. I was standing in such a way that my reflection overlapped with the other, larger skeleton, Atticus. We seemed to be a perfect fit. I haven't slept since. I know that I'll return to the east side of town. Eventually I will, because it feels like it's about my time. The five-toed man is going to make something out of me. Something important. I never got my name on a plaque, but I suppose, in a way, this is better. Honestly, I'm just happy to know that I'll be with Riley again. We'll fall through the atmosphere, together, land in front of Curbside Emporium, together, and maybe, if I'm lucky, if Riley's forgiven me, we'll look up into the sky, together, and I'll feel that perfect warmth again. Story 7. The apartment across from me was supposed to be empty. I was 19 when I moved into my first off-campus apartment. It was nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood near my college. The building was old. The hallways always smelled faintly of damp carpet, but the rent was cheap, and I felt independent for the first time in my life. One of the first things I noticed was how thin the walls were. I could hear my neighbors arguing or the old man downstairs coughing at night. What unsettled me most, though, was the apartment directly across from mine. The landlord told me it had been vacant for months, but sometimes, late at night, I would hear noises coming from inside, soft footsteps, or a dragging sound like furniture being moved. I convinced myself it was just the pipes or sounds carrying from another floor. About a week later, I was up late working on a paper when I heard knocking in the hallway. I checked the time, 2:43 in the morning. The knocking wasn't on my door, it was on the one across the hall. I slowly looked through the peephole, but no one was there. What froze me was the sight of the door across from me, cracked open when I was certain it had been shut. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe the landlord had been in there for some reason, though it didn't explain why it would be in the middle of the night. I left the light on and eventually fell asleep on the couch. The next night, it escalated. Around the same time, I heard noises again. This time it was coming from inside the empty apartment. Scraping, followed by what sounded like a low groan. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. The message said, "Why are you awake?" I froze. I didn't recognize the number and hadn't shared my contact with many people at school. Before I could react, another message came through. "I can see your light on." My heart was pounding as I shut the blinds and tried to convince myself it was some prank. But when I looked out the peephole, the hallway was empty. Both doors were shut again. The next day, I casually asked the landlord if someone had moved into the apartment across from me. He shook his head and said it was still empty. I didn't mention the noises or the texts. That night, things got worse. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my front door handle being tested, like someone was slowly turning it back and forth. I sat frozen, gripping the lamp like it was a weapon. The handle stopped moving, and then I heard 3 knocks on the door across the hall. The sound was followed by a dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. The next morning, I saw a note taped to the door across from me. The handwriting was jagged and uneven. It said, "You shouldn't stay here." From that night on, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept a weapon close by and double-checked every lock before bed. Another night, while working on my laptop, I heard creaking across the hall again. Then came a text from the same unknown number, "You're awake again." Seconds later, another message arrived. "You're looking at the door right now, aren't you?" I forced myself to check the peephole. The hallway was empty. Both doors were shut. But then I heard a low groan, this time clearly from inside the vacant apartment. 3 knocks followed, deliberate and slow. I watched as the door across the hall opened just an inch, then close again. That was the moment I knew it wasn't my imagination. The following night, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lights. Around 3 a.m., my door handle rattled again. Silence followed, and then the same 3 knocks came from across the hall. When I looked through the peephole, I saw the vacant apartment's door slowly opening. A faint sound of heavy breathing carried out from the darkness inside. I stumbled back, terrified, and my phone buzzed again. The text read, "Don't look away." I locked myself in the bathroom and stayed there until the sun came up. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the hallway was empty, but taped to the door across from me was another note. "You shouldn't stay here." I packed my things and moved out that same day. I never told the landlord or my friends exactly why I left. Even now, years later, I sometimes lie awake at night and swear I can still hear it. 3 slow knocks. Story 8. Something in the woods copies our campfire songs. I should have known something was wrong when Jake stopped singing along. We've been going to Camp Wildwood for 3 summers straight. Me, Jake, Sarah, and Tommy. It wasn't anything fancy, just a patch of state forest up north where you could pitch a tent for $20 a night. No self-service, no bathroom facilities. Just you in the woods for miles in every direction. We loved it. This was supposed to be our last trip before college scattered us across the country. Sarah had gotten into some fancy school in California. Tommy was heading to trade school, and Jake and I were staying local, but figured things would never be quite the same. So we planned this final weekend, packed our usual supplies, and driven 4 hours to our favorite spot beside Crystal Lake. The first night went perfectly. We'd set up camp in our usual clearing, about 50 yards back from the water. Sarah had brought a guitar like always, and after we got a good fire going, she started playing the songs we've been singing together for years. Country Roads, Sweet Caroline, all the classics that sound better when you're slightly off-key and surrounded by friends. That's when I first heard it, just as Sarah finished the chorus of Country Roads. I swear I heard someone else singing the last line from somewhere in the trees behind us. The voice was faint, maybe carried on the wind, but it was definitely there. I looked around the others, but they were already launching into the next verse, laughing at Tommy's attempt at harmonizing. Did you guys hear that? I asked during a break between songs. Hear what? Sarah adjusted her grip on the guitar neck. Someone singing from the woods. Jake laughed. Probably just an echo off the lake. Man, sound does weird things out here. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. The voice had sounded too clear, too deliberate to be an echo. Still, I didn't want to kill the mood, so I let it go. The second night, it happened again. We were sitting around the fire, and Sarah just finished playing Puff the Magic Dragon, a song that always made us feel like kids again, even though we were all 18. As the last chord faded, I heard again a voice in the darkness, singing the final line word for word. This time, Jake heard it too. He sat up straighter, his head tilted toward the trees. What was that? He asked. I told you guys yesterday. I said, there's someone out there. It's probably just another campsite, Sarah said, though she sounded less certain than the night before. Sound carries weird in the forest. We sat in silence for a moment, listening. The usual night sound surrounded us. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, wind rustling through leaves. But no voices, no other campers. Tommy grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the tree line. The beam illuminated nothing but trunks and undergrowth, shadows dancing as the light moved. Maybe we should check the camp registry when we head out, Jake suggested. See if there are other people nearby. But I'd already seen the registry when we signed in. We were the only ones registered for this section of the forest. The third night changed everything. Sarah had just started playing House of the Rising Sun, a newer addition to our campfire repertoire that she'd been practicing all summer. She was only halfway through the first verse when the voice joined in. This time, it wasn't singing the words we'd already finished. It was harmonizing with Sarah in real time, note for note, word for word. The voice came from multiple directions now, as if whatever was out there had moved around our camp while singing. Sarah's fingers froze on the strings. The guitar fell silent, but the voice in the woods continued singing for another few seconds before it, too, stopped. The silence that followed felt suffocating. That's not an echo, Tommy whispered. Jake stood up so fast he knocked over his camp chair. We need to leave. Right now. Don't be ridiculous, Sarah said, but her voice was shaking. It's probably just what? Jake's voice cracked. Just some psycho who's been watching us for 3 days, learning our songs. I wanted to argue, but the fear in Jake's voice matched what I was feeling. This wasn't some innocent camper at a distant site. This was something else, something that had been observing us, studying us. Let's just pack up in the morning, I said, trying to be the voice of reason. We'll leave first thing. But as I said it, the voice started up again. This time it wasn't singing, it was talking, repeating our conversation back to us in a voice that sounded almost like mine, but not quite right. Let's just pack up in the morning. We'll leave first thing. Then it repeated Sarah's words. It's probably just... Then Tommy's. Asterisk, that's not an echo. Each phrase came from a different spot in the darkness, as if multiple people were positioned around our camp, throwing our own words back at us. Jake grabbed the biggest flashlight we had and started walking toward the trees. Show yourself, he shouted. What do you want? I caught his arm. Don't. Just don't. But it was too late. The voice responded, using Jake's own words. Show yourself. What do you want? But this time, it wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from behind us, from the direction of our tents. We spun around, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Nothing. But as we stood there, breathing hard and trying to make sense of what was happening, we heard it again. Singing. It was Country Roads, the first song Sarah had played 3 nights ago. But now there were 4 voices singing it, each one slightly different, each one an imperfect copy of one of ours. My voice, Jake's voice, Sarah's voice, Tommy's voice, all singing together from somewhere in the darkness beyond our fire's reach. The harmony was beautiful and terrifying. We didn't sleep that night. We sat back to back around the dying fire, flashlights in hand, listening to our own voices, singing our favorite songs back to us from the woods. Sometimes the singing would stop, and we'd hear our conversations from earlier in the weekend being replayed, discussions about college, inside jokes, even private moments when we thought no one else was listening. When dawn finally came, we packed our gear in record time. Nobody talked about what had happened. We just wanted to get out of there. It wasn't until we were loading the car that I realized Jake hadn't said a word all morning. He'd helped pack, nodded when we asked him questions, but he hadn't actually spoken since the night before. "You okay, man?" I asked him as we secured the tent to the roof rack. He looked at me, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. He tried a second time, and when words finally came out, they weren't in his voice. They were in mine. "You okay, man?" He said, using my exact intonation, my exact tone. That was 6 months ago. We never talked about what happened at Camp Wildwood. Not once. Sarah and Tommy went off to their schools, and Jake and I started at the local community college. Everything seemed normal, except Jake never speaks in his own voice anymore. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but over time, I realized that every word Jake says is something one of us said during those 3 days in the woods. He speaks using our voices, our inflections, our words, like he's some kind of recording device playing back conversations from that weekend. The others don't seem to notice. When Jake talks, they respond normally as if nothing's wrong. But I hear it. I hear Sarah's voice coming out his mouth when he orders coffee. I hear Tommy's laugh when Jake thinks something's funny. I hear my own voice when he's trying to be serious. And sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I can hear singing outside my window. For voices harmonizing to songs we used to sing around the campfire, getting more perfect each time. I think something came back with us from those woods. Something that's still learning, still copying, still watching. And I'm starting to wonder if Jake is the only one it took. Have you ever noticed yourself saying things you don't remember deciding to say? Story 9. Ghost Story. What follows is a recollection. Many people post many stories in many places, but this happened to me. For whatever it's worth, I need to share this with you all. Ghost Story. Be quiet, sweet boy. Daddy is really tired, and he doesn't like to be woken up. I nodded, and silently continued adding and subtracting fractions on the worksheet in front of me. My pace through the work was brisk, and in just a few minutes I was finished. My brother took advantage of my pencil's rest to ask me a question. How do you do multiplication? 9 times 8 takes too long. I glanced over at my father, laid across the couch. He shifted. He mumbled, "Shut the fuck, you too. Go outside." "But I'm not done with my homework yet." "Dad," my brother said. Nick never did know when to be quiet. "Get the fuck outside," my father said, his foot lashing out to kick the coffee table. The French onion dip that had been sitting on it burst open on the carpet. "Clean it the fuck up," he screamed. "I can't get a fucking minute to myself in this fucking house," he bellowed, shifting himself from a lying position to a standing one. Apparently, being the manager of an arcade was exhausting work. My brother and I ran for the door. The clatter of the screen door, making note of our escape into the summer sun as my father's ire turned towards our mother. I knew she'd clean up the dip, and I knew she'd need new eyeshadow before the day was out. The backyard was inhabited by imaginary fairies and teeming with adventure. The heroes and villains in the backyard were easier to find, and our time there was a highlight of our years at that house. The grapevines crawling across the trellis, the shed where we waged imaginary wars against fictional armies, the garden where Lola was master and commander of all things growing. I walked over to the garden, breathing a bit heavily from the sprint out the door. Lola was hunched over, pulling weeds with vigor that belied her wizened appearance. She spoke no English, and my Tagalog was very poor. "Lola, can I help?" I said, mimicking the weeding motion she was making. She nodded and smiled. We could still hear the bursts of rage coming from the house. I know she heard it. but she just motioned for my brother and I to start pulling weeds. I pulled, and a dandelion snapped at the soil line. Lola smiled at me and gently took my hands and showed me how to dig deeper and pull the roots of the invasive plant from the earth. She threw her hands up and re-illustrated how to properly weed after I made the same mistake with the next one. Once I'd mastered the technique, she motioned to the green peppers and gave a thumbs up and a smile. I think she was telling me that the weeding made the green peppers happy. In my mind, we were stopping the yellow-crowned Orcish invaders from destroying the peaceful green pepper tribe. The memories of Lola all followed the same script. I wish there was some nuance to make the story hit harder, but the truth of it is that she was the kindest and most patient human god ever put on this earth. She taught me to pray, taught me to care for things that can't care for themselves, like green peppers. Her brightly colored headscarf has been a totem throughout my life, beauty in the face of pain. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I even knew she had been fighting cancer in those years. I still don't know why her lack of hair never stood out to me then. One night, I woke up suddenly. The moon was streaming through the window, washing the room in a relaxed luminescence that felt calming. At the foot of my bed, Lola was standing. She looked at me with her headscarf and wrinkles and serene smile. She held her finger to her lip and mouthed something I could translate this time. She told me that everything would be okay. I found out the next day that she had died the evening prior. She wasn't even at home. She had been at my cousin's brownstone 30 minutes away. I never told anyone about her visiting me that night. And no matter what life took or gave to me, no matter how far I drifted from spirituality or wonder, I have never once doubted that this beautiful woman, my Lola, had come to say goodbye that night. Story 10. My new house has a window I can't find from the inside. I should clarify, I bought my new house about 3 months ago. Nothing too fancy, just what I can afford. To be honest, I consider myself lucky that I was able to get it. I've always had a thing for old houses, so when it came on the market, I jumped at the chance. I didn't really notice the window at first. I think I was just keen to get the sale through and get settled. From the street, it all looks perfectly normal, with a weird window on the second floor above the porch. I say weird. There's really nothing particularly unusual about it in terms of the outside. But inside the house, no matter how often I walk around the upstairs rooms, it just isn't there. At first I assumed it was some trick of the architecture. Old English houses can be pretty eccentric, with all sorts of awkward angles, funny doors that open into places you don't expect. In my house hunt, I certainly viewed a fair few odd ones. I suppose I told myself it was a charming quirk. Still, I started making a few notes in the first week, more for planning's sake than anything. The upstairs is 3 bedrooms, 1 main hallway, and a smaller cross hall that connects them. I cross-checked my scribbles to the floor plan from the estate agents. I even measured it all, checking everything lines up where it should. And it does, except when I try to account for that window. The measurements, if you can call my pacing around measuring, imply there should be a space roughly the size of a cloakroom that just isn't there. I thought maybe there was some closed-off loft space. But between the rooms, between the walls, there's nowhere for it to go. I still can't get my head around it. But with all the stress of moving, I sort of pushed it out of my mind, at least until the noises started. I first noticed the noises in about my 3rd week in the house. After a late night painting the living room walls, I heard this tapping from upstairs. I was a little spooked, I'll admit, but I figured it was just house-settling noises, and chalked my nerves up to poor sleep. I kept telling myself the same thing every night as the noises carried on. It was this tapping and these drawn-out creaks like with expanding and contracting every single night starting at 1 in the morning like clockwork. It always seemed to come from the same place, the right-hand wall of the upstairs hall, just where the missing space should be. I did my best to ignore it, but as the days passed, the noises seemed to get louder, more insistent. They started to wake me up at night, and I could swear they'd gotten less like creaks and taps and more like deliberate knocks. I even started to pick out the sound of glass being knocked rather than wall. I started losing sleep. So badly, I was debating taking time off work. After nearly 2 weeks of it, it wasn't just a knocking. The whole house started to feel unbalanced, like something just out of sight was really wrong. My interest in the window came back. In the tiny bits of sleep, I swear I was dreaming about it. I called in sick from work one Monday and decided to map every wall again. I counted steps, windows, doors. When my step counts didn't add up on Tuesday, I tore up the carpets and counted the floorboards. At 2 a.m. on Thursday, still in my pajamas, I decided to answer the knocking with my own. Basically, I swung a claw hammer into the wall. These layers of paper, paint, and plaster crumbled away as I kept hitting the wall. The history of the house that I loved just collecting at my feet. Eventually it all gave way, and the knocking stopped dead. There was nothing. No hidden window. No secret door. Just brick, littered with tiny chip marks from the hammer. Still a bit frantic, I pressed my ear to the wall. Silence. After that, I just ran outside into the rain and squinted at that damned upstairs window under the streetlight. To anyone looking out, it must have seemed like I'd gone mad. I suppose I had really. I think I almost came to my senses until I heard it again. Knocking. The sound of someone knocking on glass. I haven't slept more than an hour in days now. When I close my eyes, I see the missing room, the space the house refuses to give up. In my mind, it's there, perfectly aligned, exactly where the measurements say it should be. I dream of standing inside it. But the dream always ends before I can turn around to see how I got in. The knocking is still there. I've tried to ignore it, to bury my head in pillows, drown it in white noise and podcasts, even leave the house entirely. It just follows me, 1 in the morning, without fail, sometimes faint, like a distant memory tapping on the edge of a dream. Sometimes it's so loud, I don't know how the neighbors don't hear it too. Nobody does. No one ever looks at that window either. I've watched them, delivery drivers, dog walkers, even friends I've tried to lure into noticing. Their eyes slip right past it, like it isn't even there, like I'm the only one who sees it. The last few days, the knocking's been getting louder again, but it's not steady anymore, it's impatient, like frantic fists against glass. And the window, from outside, is different again. I know it's different. For weeks, I thought its curtains were drawn, but yesterday I realized the glass itself is darker. When I try to stare longer, my eyes start watering so badly I have to look away. Or maybe I'm just crying. The house isn't balanced anymore. The walls don't feel straight. The floorboards give beneath my feet in places I know should be solid. Sometimes I find myself counting steps and stopping short, because somehow I've taken more than I should have. I can feel it constantly. At the edges of my vision, the house breathes. The rooms are wrong. The hallways spiral in patterns that shouldn't be possible. I swear I opened 6 different doors today before I managed to get out. I know I shouldn't go back, but I think maybe I have to. I think I'm meant to. It's hard to explain, but that window is watching me, even when I keep the curtains drawn downstairs, even when I sit with every light blazing. I can feel it somehow angled towards me, like the whole house has turned itself around so that room that doesn't exist is at its center, and I'm the one in it, just knocking to get out.